Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's review, we are going to be reviewing a couple different porters from two different brewers. Porters are one of my favorite styles. I have a few favorites, but porters are very, very high up that list. Stouts seem to get all the glory, and the porter always seems to play second fiddle, and I absolutely love porters, and they are distinctly different. All the related styles, they are different. Nonetheless, today, we're jumping into two I have never had. I did source both of these from my local Total Wine here in Tampa, so I presume these are relatively easy to find. We're going to be starting with Anchor Brewing's Porter, aptly named Porter. Very inventive, I know. 5.6% ABV on this one. They are based out of San Francisco, California. And then number two, we're moving over to Maui Brewing Company's Coconut Hiwa, which is a coconut porter brewed with toasted coconut. This one's 6% ABV out of Kihei, Hawaii, which is on the island of Maui. Hawaii, obviously, an archipelago, many different islands. This one is from the city of Kihei on the island of Maui. So nonetheless, really excited to jump in. Two porters I've never had. So we're going to get kicking off with the Anchor Brewing Porter. Again, this one's 5.6% ABV. Okay, so jumping into our first beer, this is Anchor Brewing Company's Porter, the Porter, 5.6% ABV. Again, they're based out of San Francisco, California. In terms of bottle art, their bottle art is normally very subdued. It's just got their scripted label and their Anchor logo that's on pretty much every beer I've ever seen that they produce. So they are quite consistent with their labeling. Nonetheless, let's get this cracked. All right. And poured into our porter glass here. Oh, that is a beautiful dark brown. I can see the carbonation. Porters do tend to have a bit more carbonation than their stout counterparts. They have formed a decent head. All right. And holding this up to the light, it's a very, very dark beer indeed, but unlike most stouts and imperials and imperial porters for that matter, you can see just a bit of light through the bottom if you hold it up to a bright light. But it is very, very dark, but that is normal for a porter. It looks fantastic. Head looks nice and creamy. Let's give it a sniff. Okay. That's got a reasonably pronounced aroma. It's not over the top, but it's certainly in the high end of average. Really what you get on here is a malty sweetness. Just an underlying suggestion of roastiness in the malts, which obviously they are. But overall it smells more malty sweet, almost fruit-like in its aroma. Kind of raisin, plum, prune, kind of rich, deep fruit like that. And that's quite common in aroma and often with flavor in porters. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what this one's about. I've never had this one. Mm. Mm. Oh. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a very nice porter. That's a very nice porter. Okay, so when you first get it in your mouth, the first thing that hits you is that malty sweetness. And there's a slight bit of the fruit that you get on the nose that comes through in the flavor, but it's subtle. And as it rolls around the palate, it's ridiculously creamy. I mean, it's just silky, creamy, smooth. And it starts to open up, and then that toasty malt backbone really comes in and starts to bloom and intensify. And it takes on almost a roasted coffee-like quality. It's a very deep roast to the malt. And the beer overall is relatively subtle in how it presents itself flavor-wise. It's not over the top. It's not ridiculously intense, but it's layered, and the way that it develops is quite interesting. So you go from that malty sweetness up front into this nice bit of deep, rich fruit, and then the malt starts to slowly creep in and intensify, and you get that nice roasty edge to it. And it's got kind of that classic deep roast, and kind of takes on a roasted coffee-like quality. So that's kind of the whole ride of the finish. It's not a very, very long finish at all, but it is interesting and enjoyable. Mouthfeel silky smooth. I'm going to jump in for one more sip here. The body is medium, which for 5.6, that's exactly where I would expect it to be. Very nice. It feels nice in the mouth. Very, very creamy. Yeah, and that flavor, it just intensifies and then just kind of holds there, and then it slowly starts to dip away. Not a very long finish, but it's clean. And at the end of it, really what's left lingering is that roasted malt character. It's roasted malt and kind of roasted coffee. Those are the lingering flavors that continue down the descent to the finish. And it's very nice. It's very clean. Got a nice wet quality to it. It's not dry at all. The creaminess of it does make it feel rather thick rolling around the palate, though I wouldn't say it feels viscous per se. It's really just the silky quality of it that adds to that perception. Very well balanced. As with most porters, this style is a story of the malt. It is all about the malt and how it takes you on the ride from start to finish and how it develops its flavors. This is a very good one. I would say this more or less checks all the boxes for a classic porter, and it does it very, very well. I'm going to take my time sipping on this one and come up with my scores. And when we come back, we will get to the Maui Brewing Coconut Hiwa, the Toasted Coconut Porter at 6% ABV. Okay, now jumping into our second beer of today's porter review, we move on to Maui Brewing's Coconut Hiwa. This is a coconut porter. It is brewed with toasted coconut. 6% ABV on this one. They are based in Kihei, Hawaii, which is on the island of Maui. Not particularly interesting per se art on the can, but it looks very clean. The design is very clean itself. I really like it. Nonetheless, let's get this one cracked. Satisfying. And poured right in the glass. All right, this again looks like a classic porter. Nice dark brown, pretty effervescent. All right, looks like this one's forming quite a bit better head than the prior. Indeed, to the point I can't quite get all of that in on the initial pour, but that's okay. That'll give me a minute to check it out. Just as with the Anchor, again, it's a dark beer, but it's not so dark that you can't see light if you're holding it up to a pretty good light source. Indeed, I can actually see a little bit more light through the bottom of the glass on this one than I could on the prior, so it's not quite as dark, and I noticed that when I was pouring it. Head formed beautifully lush, beautifully creamy. It's got a mix of small, medium, and large carbonation bubbles, so it's probably going to collapse a little bit as we go through here, but that's okay. As it works its way down, I can top this off. Waste not, want not. Perfect. Now let's see if I can smell it through this pillowy head. The answer is yes, though not horribly pronounced. And frankly, that head's a bit robust to be jumping in for a first dive. So I'm just going to break this down a little bit with my finger. That'll agitate it and hopefully let some of the aromas escape out of this glass here. I'm hopeful. Yeah, it's a little more pronounced. So on the nose, it smells very much like a classic porter, not dissimilar to the Anchor, though this does have a slightly more pronounced aroma in terms of the roasty malts that come through. I can smell them a lot more clearly. It doesn't smell sweet malt like the Anchor did. This smells like roasted malt, which it smells great. And I can just pick up a hint of the coconut. It's not super pronounced, but it's there in the back. The roasted malt is still the dominant aroma on this one. And honestly, that head settled down enough. I'm going to jump right in and take a sip here. Okay, nice porter. The malts, quite toasted. They really come through quite cleanly. Up front, when you first get it in your mouth, it does have a little bit of malty sweetness, but that immediately gets out of the way and the roasted malts really come to the forefront. The coconut that you get the hint on the aroma, the same thing comes through in the beer. It's just a hint. It's not heavy. The malt is still the star of this beer. It's just got a nice addition of some toasted coconut in the back that adds just a little extra depth to the flavor. Mouthfeel is just as silky and creamy as it was on the Anchor. Very, very nice mouthfeel. Very creamy. I'm going to jump back in for body and really pick out how this finish opens up. The body on this one is medium again, just like with the Anchor. So it's textbook porter. It's not a totally massively heavy style. So it really is appropriate for the ABV on this. Again, it's just that slight sweetness that opens up front, then it opens into beautifully deep roasted malt. There's really no hint of fruit at all in this. It's a really roasted malt that comes through. Indeed, it might be a little deeper roast than your average porter, which is quite nice. I like it. It's got a little more deeply roasted edge to it, a little more char. Coconut comes through. It's just subtle. It's in the back. You can taste it, but it's subtle. The malt is still the star of the show. The malts in this one develop a little bit differently, and it's a slightly different flavor than it was on the Anchor. There's just the slightest hint of a coffee-like roasted malt flavor, but it's very slight. That was actually relatively pronounced in the Anchor. This is much more just a deeply, richly roasted dark malt. I don't even want to say chocolate malt because it doesn't take on a chocolate-like quality. It's just a really nice, deeply, richly roasted malt here. I'm going to jump in one more sip. Just the slightest hint of sweetness. It immediately opens into deep, richly roasted malt. And it's beautiful. It's got a nice pronounced flavor too. Some porters are tamer than others. This one's got a much more bold flavor, which I really appreciate in a beer. You know, just go big or go home. That's my philosophy. There's a time and a place for a lighter beer. I'll drink sessions, but if you're making a porter, why not make it big and bold and flavorful? And they've done just that. This is a really excellent porter. Anchor was, and this is. These are two really, really good porters. Some of the better porters I've had as of late. The finish on this one is quite a bit longer than on the Anchor. I think the deeply roasted nature of it is making the flavor stick around the palate a lot more, even though it's got roughly the same mouthfeel, roughly the same viscosity. It's just sticking around with a lot more presence, so it lets you enjoy each sip quite a bit longer. It's very, very well balanced. The coconut didn't overpower, which is easy to do in beers that use coconut, and they really let the malts shine. Porter is a style that is all about the malts, and this is just beautifully balanced. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, call it my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked, starting with the Anchor Brewing Porter. This one's 5.6% ABV. Anchor Brewing is based out of San Francisco, California. The aroma on this one. The aroma was nice, but really it wasn't super pronounced. It was on the high end of average, and I gave it thusly a 6. The taste on this. This taste was really, really nice. It started with a nice malty sweetness, which you could pick up in the aroma. Then it started to open into some really deep, rich fruit, and then the roastiness of the malt came through, kind of encapsulating richly roasted malts and also nice roast coffee. So it was really more or less a classic porter in that sense. I just would have liked a little more pronounced flavor to give it perfection. I gave it a 9. Body on this was textbook porter, especially for the ABV range. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, absolutely silky smooth, just lush and creamy. It also gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one. The finish was enjoyable. It certainly was clean and let you get all of the different elements of the malt bill that went into it, but it didn't last a super long time. It was the high end of average. I gave it a 6. Head and retention on this one. It was pretty good. It was certainly above average, but it didn't have quite the staying power that I rather anticipated, given the fine effervescence. It gets above average, it gets a 7. Appearance-wise, this was a textbook porter, gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Balance on this one. Very, very well balanced beer. A porter is a beer that's all about the malt bill, and this had a really excellent balance of the chosen malts in there that lets you pick out the nice sweetness in the front of the flavor, also in the aroma, the fruit kind of characters that came in, and then that nice roastiness, and then the development of roasted coffee. Beautiful porter. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling an intangible, I absolutely loved it. This could be one porter out there that you could use as a textbook example of what a porter is. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I really appreciated it, and I stand by that this is a really great example of what a porter is. However, there were a few categories where it fell a little short. The aroma really was a big one. The length of the finish was another. The head and retention threw me off a little bit too, especially considering the fine effervescence, but it only missed the mark by a bit. I gave it an 8 out of 10. That brings the total score on the Anchor Brewing's Porter to an 86 out of 100. So certainly well above average beer here, getting in the top tier territory. Well worth seeking. If you've never had it, it's a great beer. All the beers I've had by Anchor have been very, very well done indeed. Moving on to beer number 2, this is Maui Brewing's Coconut Hiwa, the toasted coconut porter out of Kihei, Hawaii, from the island of Maui. This was 6% ABV on this one. The aroma on this one was nice. It was a little bit more pronounced than the Anchor, not by much, but it was enough to give it one extra point. I gave it a 7. Taste on this was an absolutely fantastic porter. One of the things that kind of helped accentuate the taste was that coconut, and it wasn't in abundant. Though they bill it as a coconut porter, but we'll come back to that in other categories. Flavor-wise, I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. Body on this one. Just as with the Anchor, it was a perfect body for the ABV, for the style. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, again, just like the Anchor, it was absolutely creamy, silky smooth. It also gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one. Finish on this one was quite a bit longer than the Anchor. The intensity of the roast that they put for the malts in this bill really kind of brought forth the flavor, and they also intensified the length of the finish. There was just more flavor there to stick around and to last longer, and it really went the extra mile. Really getting into the upper echelon territory, it gets an 8 out of 10 for the finish. Head and retention on this one. This was a textbook perfect porter head. It was just lush and creamy. It looked like it could have been poured off of a tap. It's what I expected on the Anchor, but I didn't get. The Maui Brewing's gets a 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, just like the former, it also gets a perfect 10 out of 10. It was textbook. Balance. This was a very well balanced beer. Again, the porter is a story of the malt. It makes or breaks the beer style. And this was fantastic. However, that they build it as a coconut porter, I did appreciate that the coconut didn't overpower, but it was actually a little lacking in intensity. They could have used a little more to let it cut through some of the deep roasted malts for me. I did dock 1 point. I gave it a 9. Feeling in the intangible, I really love this one as well. I did give it a perfect 10 out of 10. This beer has a lot going for it, as does the Anchor. Finally, as an example of the style, I did rate this one higher than the Anchor. I really thought that it had a lot more intensity, which helped increase the rating on different categories objectively. Really, the only gripe I had was if the finish could have been a bit longer yet, and if the aroma had been a bit more pronounced and just a bit more coconut, I would have given it that perfect 10. But the beer was so good, I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. That brings the total score on the Maui Brewing's Coconut Hiwa to a 93 out of 100. So all total, we're looking at a 7-point spread here, which doesn't sound like much, and they're both upper echelon porters for sure. Excellent examples of a porter, but this one I think really was the reigning champion. It had more deeply roasted malts, and the flavor came through a lot more pronounced. The aroma came through more pronounced, It helped extend the finish. In all, it was just a much more robust porter, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is absolutely top tier. Ladies and gentlemen, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Comments are really big. I want to hear from you. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, just let me know. I am here for you, and I am actively seeking your input. If you want to keep in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Till next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.